Hey guys, welcome back to the TTA Performance YouTube channel, and we have a customer's 80 turbo pace car, and we're gonna be converting this one to an Overdrive 204R transmission. So I'm going to show you what's all involved with that, and kind of go over some of the details, some of the things that you have to change and adapt to make it work. It's really not that hard, but let's dive into it here. All right, so we got this 80 pace car up on the lift. This is it already started doing some modifications, has our exhaust system on it. The engine was actually a rebuild quite a few years ago that was never ran. We got it up and running. So here we have the stock turbo 350. Now, a little background. All the turbo cars have a turbo 350 transmission. Some of the non-turbo vehicles or non-turbo 301s were the metric 200, which looks very similar. And you could usually tell because the pan will actually say metric. It'll be stamped metric. That trans is not very strong, the metric trans. The Turbo 350 is pretty much a direct replacement for it if you want to upgrade, if you happen to have a 200 metric trans. With the car on the ground, we're going to take a look at this is the kickdown cable back here. So it's kind of hard to see. It wants to focus. There we go. So this is the kickdown cable. The bracket is part of this side bracket for the turbo. So this kickdown bracket is actually hooked up. Well, this one's not hooked up, but it's supposed to be hooked up to the carburetor linkage so that when it for kickdown. Now we're going to take this off, and on a 204R overdrive, there is no kickdown cable. They actually call it the TV cable or throttle valve cable. So on a Turbo 350, if that cable's not hooked up, you don't have it. It still shifts fine. It just won't have passing gear, or when you floor to throttle, it's not going to kick down into the previous gear to give you the acceleration. On a metric, or sorry, not the metric, on the 204R overdrive, the cable is actually setting line pressure in the transmission. So it's very critical. You'll hear this a lot with the 700R4 and the 204R, that the TV cable adjustment is critical because, you could smoke the transmission if you don't have it set up right. Well, yeah, it is true. And that not only is it controlling the line pressure or the pressure in the transmission, but it's also controlling your downshift based on line pressure also. The reason that they say it's critical that it be set up correctly, if you left it disconnected on the overdrive transmissions, you would have very low pump pressure, line pressure to engage those clutches and everything in the transmission. Well, if you apply power to the transmission and there's not enough holding force from the line pressure, you're going to slip those clutches. And if you slip those clutches, you're going to generate heat, you're going to wear them out, and basically you're going to smoke the trans. It's very critical that when the throttle goes wide open, that the cable for the overdrive, that TV cable, is pulled pretty much all the way tight. And you also want to make sure that when it's sitting at idle and the throttle is fully closed, that there is no slack in the cable. You want the cable to have zero slack, that it's ready to go. The minute you move the throttle, it starts pulling on the cable and it starts upping the line pressure. That's what you're after. You don't want to have too much tension at idle to where you're actually pulling on the TV cable, because now you're increasing the line pressure at idle to where you could have problems where you're getting second gear starts, meaning that the car is at a stop, you go to take off, it's in second gear, it's not fully downshifting into first gear. If you have the cable tight, you're also going to delay the shift because the line pressure is going to be higher. So even if you're not getting a second gear start, you could be delaying the shift to where it doesn't want to upshift into second gear till much later. It's going to shift harder because it's got more line pressure, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But there's all these things, and the geometry is very critical. Now, I've found that it actually works pretty good with the stock throttle linkage from the Quadrajet of this carburetor. I can't say for sure on all Quadrajet carburetors that the Turbo 350 attachment point on the linkage is the correct geometry for the 204R. It works on the 80 and 81 turbo carbs. So again, this is very critical. We use a TCI adjustable TV cable, the universal one that you can actually adjust the length, because with the carburetor offset like this, the TV cable needs to be a little bit longer than some of your standard ones. So we're going to disconnect that cable so that when we take the trans out, we're not fighting it. I'm actually going to disconnect the battery here because I got to drop the starter out of it. So got a few things to do under here. I'm going to raise the car up. I'm going to start taking the Turbo 350 out. All right, so we got the Turbo 350 out. Motor's being supported by a screw jack so that the distributor doesn't run into the firewall. And here we have the 204R on the trans jack, ready to go. We got the torque converter in. A couple of things when we're doing assembly with a automatic transmission, before putting the torque converter in, always fill it with fluid. Got it laying upside down on the ground. We'll pour fluid into the I call it the snout, the pump snout. But basically fill the torque converter as much as we can with the transmission fluid. Then we go and put it on, and you really got to like wiggle and spin and try to get it on all the way. You have to get it on all the way. And one of the things that I've noticed is if you want to try to see if it's in all the way, is that I can't get my hand back here. So that seems to me that it is down all the way. A lot of times you go by feel, you go by sound. If it thuds when it goes on, you're down all the way. Another thing to look at is here's the flange where we go on to the back of the block. Here's the flywheel connection point. This should be pretty far in, and it's kind of hard to see. Maybe we can the flange. We don't want that sticking out farther or up flush to this. It's got to be behind it. Basically, when we put the transmission in and we go to bolt the flange up to get the flange up to the block, we want to make sure that there is a gap between the torque converter and the flywheel where it mounts, these holes here. There should be a gap between there. I should have to take the torque converter, I should have to bring the torque converter to the flywheel. If I put it up in here and the flywheel's already, and the torque converter is already touching the flywheel, and I don't have the flange bolted up, or I'm not close to the mating surface on the back of the block, then we've got an issue. The torque converter is not in all the way. So I'm pretty confident this one's in all the way. Like I said, I can't get my hand behind it. So what else do we have going on? Coming to this side of the transmission, dipstick tube is on. This is a brand new aftermarket dipstick. It bolts up with the strap to the top of the bell housing there. We got these plugs were just in here for shipping the transmission. We bought this transmission. This transmission's only got like maybe not even 1,000 miles on it. It was a performance built one from somewhere. I got it from a customer of mine who converted to a 4-speed, not in a turbo car. He had it behind a 400. But we're gonna pull the plugs out of there at some point, and then when we make the transmission cooler lines. Transmission mount, the mount on this, we're going to change out the seal too. That looks like it might have gotten damaged or something and had a little bit of a leak, so we're going to switch that out. But this transmission mount, this is basically a Turbo 400 transmission mount. This will fit the new cross member as soon as we put the cross member in. But we're just getting some things situated before putting the trans up into the car. So then on the back of the engine, we don't do any prep work on the back of the engine. I inspected to make sure that the flywheel was not cracked. It's in good shape. We do have I like to lay out the cable. This is the TCI adjustable throttle valve cable, TV cable. I have that already routed, and I can probably turn a light on up in here. I've got it up and routed going to the original bracket. I don't have it in the bracket yet, but I just kind of routed it where I needed to because it was easy to get to at this point. Once the transmission's pretty close to being up and in, I'll probably hook that up and put it into the TV cable hole right here. But we've got that going where it needs to go. As far as the adjustment for the length, basically for that TV cable, all I did was laid it out next to the Turbo 350 kickdown cable and kind of matched its length. That should be a good starting point, probably right where we need it, honestly. So we're going to get that, that's all set to go. And now we'll start jacking it up and get it up into the car, and then also get out the new Summit cross member so that we can attach that and support the back of the trans. All right, so here's the Summit Racing cross member, and I like to use this one because it's just a direct bolt in. These are the stock locations for the original cross member, and as you can see, it kind of, we'll get a top view, kind of curves back, and then you saw the Turbo 400 trans mount that had the 2 bolts coming out of it. That's where they're going to sit. They're going to go in those slots right there. They give you the hardware to mount it up. The only thing that you have to modify is the subframe, the chassis on the car. You got to drill the holes out to a 1/2 inch to fit those bolts. The bolts that they give you are a little bit larger than the factory bolts, so you just got to drill out the holes in the frame to a 1/2 inch, and it pretty much just bolts in. There's really nothing else, fabrication or bending or anything like that. Just bolts right in, transmission mount bolts on, and you're ready to go. So the transmission's in, and shift cable's in the way here, but with the new cross member, which fits very nice. And this is what I was talking about with the torque converter when you're putting it in. Notice, get it focused on there, we have a nice gap. I'll have to bring the torque converter forward, kind of moving it up to the flywheel. That's what we want to see. Because if this was bolted up and this was already hitting this and I couldn't push it back, that would be a problem. So that's all incorrectly. It's all hooked up. We've got transmission cooler lines made. It's hard to see. Actually, this one's short yet. I've actually made it too short, so we're going to lengthen that one. But we got it going up to the radiator. Drive shafts in. That was pretty easy. So something I wanted to also show there. I've noticed that there's 2 different style 204Rs. The early cars, or the earlier versions, I believe, don't have this connector. They have a single spade connector right here, and I believe I've hooked up the single spade connector to power, and that'll activate the lockup torque converter. Later models, I believe, have this 4-prong connector, and there's, can we see it in there? There's 3 terminals in there. It's the 2 on the left and 1 on the upper right. There's the bottom right is empty. And from reading, you need power at the top one, ground at the bottom one on the left side. The upper right is for the computer, which we're not using. So putting power and ground to these 2 will actually activate and lock up the torque converter. But like I said, the earlier ones just had a single spade here, and it would only lock up when it went into overdrive. I believe this one here will lock up in just about any gear. So what we did here is, this is a 4th gear pressure port. There's usually a plug here to, you could take the plug out and actually put a pressure gauge on there. So we put this 90-degree street elbow brass fitting, and then we put an oil pressure switch on there. And what that's going to do is we're going to wire up to this, so that this is going to get wired to the connector on this side. And what that's going to do then is only lock up the converter when we're in overdrive. I'm also probably going to put a pressure switch in there. Not pressure switch, I'm sorry. So what I'm probably going to do then is also interrupt that circuit with a vacuum switch, an adjustable vacuum switch. And that vacuum switch is going to only allow the converter to lock up when engine vacuum is going to be, probably higher than 5 inches of mercury. If we have high vacuum on the engine, we have overdrive engaged, it'll lock up the converter. This way then, if you need to accelerate and vacuum drops and goes below 5 inches, goes closer to 0, or obviously if it gets into boost, it's going to kick the lockup converter out. It's going to allow it to accelerate in overdrive if the vehicle is going fast enough. If you push on the gas pedal even harder, it'll downshift into 3rd gear then. But that's the plan for this one. So we're going to finish hooking up some other stuff, and then go over some other things as we install it. All right, next up, I'm going to show you how to remove the shifter so that we can make the modifications necessary for the overdrive transmission. Now, this car was kind of a in-process restoration type deal, so some of the parts are already missing. But the shifter, I'm going to show you the shift knob because this is very important. A lot of people don't know how the shift knob comes off. A lot of people want to just grab it and twist it, thinking it just threads on or something to that effect. It doesn't. You're going to break the handle if you do that, and I'll show you why in a second. So what I'm going to do is put the shifter in a different gear, and on the sides here, maybe we can get, I don't know if we can get it detailed in there or not. There's areas to pry with a small screwdriver, and basically this little push button just pops off. It's got a little clip in there to like kind of friction fit it on. So we'll pop this off and I'll show you what's inside there. Okay, so as you can see, this is just a phone doesn't want to focus. This is just a little square hole. There's a clip on the end of the stem there, but we don't remove that. We don't have to remove that clip for the shift knob. But all right, let's see what we can do here. So down inside, and this is kind of nasty looking, you can see this spring clip, and you got the two holes in there. Yeah, so you need a snap ring pliers, and this is the snap ring pliers that I use, and we're going to put the tips of those will fit in those little holes, and then we'll be able to expand the clip and get it out. So I'm going to do that right now, and I'll show you in more detail then. All right, so here is the clip. It's very dirty, but you squeeze the pliers. These pliers are reversible, but I have it set up so that when they squeeze the pliers, it expands the ring, and that ring would sit on this little groove right here, and that's what holds it on. Now, what keeps the shift knob from spinning? Well, if you look at the top side here, sorry for the focus problem that we're having, we have these two little notches on either. There's a notch on either side of the actual shifter. So what that does is that aligns with the little pieces here. So that's why you don't want to twist this knob. You twist this knob and you'll shear off those little squares in there that keep the knob on there. And the thing is, you shear those off. That's actually your stop to keep the shift handle from going all the way down on the actual shifter stalk, if you will. So I see it a lot where you'll see this is sitting down here, the knob is sitting on top. There's the clip we were talking about that holds it on there, but you'll see this actually sitting down. That's because somebody tried to twist it. They tried to twist it, they sheared off the little squares inside of there, now it's just a round hole, and it just falls straight down. So you can buy these reproduction. If you have one that's stripped out, you can get a new one. But then the clip is actually holding it from coming off. So, and actually this wants to slide a little bit. But so now we're gonna, with the shift knob off, we can take off the plate, the trim plate, and then we're gonna actually take the center console out of this car. Now, usually we got a couple screws back here that are not factory, but most of the time the console actually screws underneath the dashboard on either side. We've got the screws underneath the glove compartment, or whatever you want to call it here. They had the lid and everything, the compartment's been removed already. We got the window switch partially out. We'll unplug it here, and then we'll get the whole console removed from the interior. We'll be able to access the shifter, take the 4 bolts out, take off the shift cable, and we'll put the shifter on the bench, and we'll go to the next steps as to modifying it for the overdrive. All right, we have the shifter on the bench, and we're going to be modifying, it's on the other side. We're going to be modifying, take this off. This detent plate right here. So it's kind of hard to see, but there's a detent plate right in here. Maybe you can see it from the other side. No, we can't. It's kind of hard to see, but this is a better angle. It's this plate right here. You can see all these little notches in it and stuff. We're going to be replacing that. It's going to have extra notch for the overdrive. Now this plate does not bolt on. This plate is actually riveted on. There's a rivet here, and there's a rivet back there. We have to grind the heads off of those. It's probably going to be easier to go from this side because the head's a little bit smaller on this side, down in there. So we're going to grind those off with a die grinder and a burr bit, and then we'll knock them out and get that plate off of there. The new one bolts on, and I'll show you that in a second. I'm going to unbolt this top plate. This top plate is just strictly there to have the holes to mount the trim plate from the console. So so we're going to take this off so we can access things easier. Then we're going to grind out those rivets, knock those out. I'll take the plate off. I'll show you the new plate that we got, and kind of go from there. All right, so we got the plate out. Here's the detent plate, and you can kind of see how it has these notches in it. This one would actually be park. Then we got reverse. Then we got neutral. Neutral is so that if you were to slide the shifter forward, it would stop before reverse. It's a reverse lockout mechanism. Then we got our drive 2, 1 for the 3-speed automatic. Taking this plate out, I did grind the rivet heads, the small end of the rivet heads, but what ends up happening, and it was a little tricky, is I tried to tap them out with a punch, and this is where it attached, was in here. Trying to take it out with a punch, those rivets were actually in there pretty tight. And what would end up happening is, as I was trying to punch the rivet out, that little piece of metal bent. I straightened it out now, but that's kind of you can kind of see that one a little bit. Those tabs are pretty thin. So what I ended up doing was actually taking a socket. I took my deep well 7/16 socket and put it underneath. The shifter's moved. So I put it underneath the head of the rivet there, and then tapped it out so that it wouldn't bend, and then got it out. So I had to get a little creative with that part of it. Maybe it would have made more sense just to grind the big rivet head off, but for right now, that seemed to work pretty well. So now the new detent plate. The new detent plate comes in this kit, which is from Shiftworks out of New York, I believe. This is the GM 4-speed overdrive automatic kit for 73 to 81 Camaro, 68 to 81 Firebird, and also fits Malibus and GTO, Le Mans, I'm assuming, stuff like that. So what comes in this kit? So it gives you everything to do the conversion. It's not just necessarily for the shifter itself. You can see there's other brackets in here and stuff, so let me get this stuff out. So this is what comes in the kit. We have our new detent plate, and when we compare it to the original, and this is upside down, we compare it to the original, it has an extra detent in it for the overdrive, and also you can see the reverse is a little different, but this is now we have the extra gear in there, and this is going to bolt into our shifter. Other pieces that came with the kit, we have this linkage for the side of the transmission. What's special about this one, this is where the cable hooks up. This is for our column linkage, to twist the column to allow for key release and everything. I've installed these before. The one thing I did notice on these is that this oval right here is just a little too small. The rod, the linkage rod that fits through here on the Firebirds, it just almost fits, but not quite. So usually a little die grinder, just open that up a little bit on both sides, and then it slips right in. If you don't have the column shift rod, or if you are a column shift car, I think this is the linkage for that. I don't use this one. It's not needed. The next thing, they give you a new bracket for the this mounts to the transmission pan and allows the shifter cable to come through and hook up to that. So they give you this piece. There's multiple holes. You can kind of adjust it where you need to depending on the car. So then we'll install that when we put the pan back on. And of course they give you the hardware for it too. There's the pin for the cable that would actually attach here, and so on. So we'll get our new detent plate hooked up. The one thing that to note is that, so you might hear this from time to time. Most of the Trans-Ams had what they call the sport shifter or rally shifter, where basically it moves over. And what does that do? So when you were in gear, you were down in manual 1, let's say, you would actually push this over and it would ratchet. And you would push it over and it would ratchet, and it only lets you do 1 gear at a time. With the overdrive detent plate being put on there, that ratcheting mechanism no longer aligns with the shift detents. It's still going to be a ratcheting mechanism for a 3-speed, but now we have the 4th gear, so we have an extra detent. So that doesn't work correctly with the new detent plate. So you're not going to be able to manually shift with the ratchet mechanism when you do this conversion. If you want to do some ratchet shifting with the overdrive, I would suggest switching to an aftermarket shifter. The B&M Quicksilver console mount for Camaro Firebird, it's the shifter that I have in my car. That shifter is awesome because it will actually mount, besides the fact that it's a console mount, I just like the way the shifter is. That shifter can be modified to do overdrive or 3-speed transmission. It's just a matter of removing a pin out of the B&M Quicksilver. Also in the kit is a new indicator. It's just a sticker tape. We'll put that on then too, and of course there's full instructions, but we'll put this on the actual cover plate when it comes time. I'll show you how to do that, but let's get this all put back together and in the car. All right, next up we're gonna put the sticker on our indicator plate, but we're not just gonna stick it over this like already installed on here. What we're gonna do is we're gonna flip it over, and we got to take out these little clips, these little push clips. We're going to pry those off so that we can get this whole indicator out. We're going to clean the lens, but then we're going to put the sticker over the lens and then put this back on. You'll notice that this one is actually in a pinkish fluorescent orange color, and that is because this is a pace car. And the pace cars had the backlighting in red. This is how they did it. It's actually a fluorescent red color. Then you'll see this on the indicator for the shifter, but also if you were to take the gauges out of the cluster, behind the speedometer, the gauge cluster itself is painted this same fluorescent red color, and that's how they got the backlighting to light up red. It's not the bulbs are clear. Normal, regular Trans-Ams and just about any GM car, this is normally a light blue color, and that would give you your white background or white lighting or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, to make everything light up red, that's how they did it. Fluorescent paint. All right, so let's talk about the TV cable and the adjustment for it. I've got it hooked up here, and we brought the cable in from the transmission, and I ended up there's the adjustment down there. It's for the length of the sheathing. And I ended up shortening it up a lot. I know I measured it off of the original Turbo 350 kickdown linkage, but ended up being way too long. So we loosened it up and pushed it together, basically shortening the cable. So we have it attached back here for the in the original bracket. And you can see this button on the side here. This button, we would be able to push this button in and then pull this little black nub out. And this will also help with adjusting the tension on the cable. But right now I have it kind of short. So normally on factory applications, you would shorten that, push the button, shorten the nub in, go wide open throttle on the linkage. It would pull the cable. Cable would max out, and then it would click and pull that little nub out. And wherever it stopped, that was supposed to be the setting, and you should be good to go. I don't want to do that on this one because it just doesn't seem like it would click very easily. It's very hard to do, and I'd rather just push the button and do it manually if I could. But I like to keep it a little bit short on the nub side, and then they give you a ton of extra cable here, and they give you the little screw stop right there to, and then there's also the little plastic adapter to hook it to the throttle linkage, which I have it hooked up right now. So what I put some tension on it when I set the little set screw clasp. I made sure there was some tension on this cable. It's not totally slack. You know, it's the minute I start to push the throttle. Oh my gosh, this is terrible. Let's see here if we can get a better focus on there. When you start to, you know, it's automatically pulling the cable. And I can go wide open throttle with it, and there's no slack in it. In fact, it's actually probably a little bit on the tight side, which I'd rather have it set with a little too much tension than not enough, because I can always go back if it's too tight for whatever reason. It seems like it's delaying shifts too long. It's not downshifting into first gear when you come to a stop, anything like that. I can always release the button, move the nub out a couple clicks, and try it again. So that's how I adjust the TV cable on these. Next up, we're gonna move on to the governor and talk about that. All right, so we took the pan down because there's another modification that I need to make to this transmission. That is correcting the speedometer for the gear ratio that we're going to be using. Now this car, it has the stock 308 gears in the rear end, but because we're using the Overdrive trans, we're actually going to step up the rear gear ratio to a 342 ratio. And when we do that, we're going to end up kind of screwing up the speedometer. So we have to, in order to change speedometer gearing, we have to actually take the pan down and get at the governor. And I've already done it. It's usually, it's behind this cover right here. So you drop the pan, and then there's a governor cover right here, and I'll get it. It's on the bench right now. So here's the governor cover with the governor in it, and it sits up in here, obviously, like that. And so we'll take the governor out here and take a look at it. It's kind of all right. So go to the bench. So here's the governor, and this controls upshifting also, and it does it with these weights, and there's springs that hold the weights. Now this one's already been modified because we bought this transmission. It was kind of a performance-built transmission, and they had modified the governor already too. What ends up happening is if you end up with one of these transmissions and it's not out of one of the performance models, so it's not like the Monte Carlo SS or the Grand National or 442 or Hurst Oldsmobile or something like that, you end up with a really heavy governor. And heavy is by what I mean is the weights. The heavier these weights are, the earlier it's going to shift. And when you have heavy weights like this, and then you go and you change the rear gear ratio to something lower, like 342, 373s, something like that, this spins really fast. And when it spins really fast and the heavy weights that are on it, it ends up flinging the weights out, and it makes it upshift to where you'll go through the first 3 gears before you get through an intersection. It shifts that quick sometimes. You can modify these by taking weight off of them, and you can also modify them by changing springs. Now, like I said, somebody's already been in here, and they took the spring out of the heavy weight, left it out completely. And then over here they have, it looks like the lighter spring, yeah, maybe it's the lighter spring, is on the smaller weight. The other thing then is this plastic gear here, this is what kind of modifies the speedometer. This is the drive gear, and then the driven gear is actually in the side of the transmission where the cable hooks onto. And you can just, that can be taken off from outside the transmission. So in this box here, I ordered, and there's ways of calculating what gears you need. I went online, I figured out this tire size, the gear ratio that we're going to use, and came up with these 2 gears basically. I forget the tooth count. I think it's 12 and 30 or something like that. So we're dealing with, we're going to change out this gear with this red one. It's kind of hard to see with the red gear here, and then this is going to go in the speedometer cable drive housing, and then this should correct our speedometer for 342s. So we'll switch that out. The next thing I'm going to do, we'll come back over to the car.
since I got the pan off and it's possible I might have to come back in here. Notice this one says metric, but it looks nothing like a Turbo 350 pan, so this is the Overdrive one. I'm actually going to come into the side of the pan right here, and as low as I can, I'm gonna drill and put a drain plug in it. And I kind of make my own drain plugs. Basically, I just went to the parts store and picked up this one. I did a half 20 oil drain plug, and then I picked up a couple of half 20 hex nuts. So I'm going to drill the pan. I'm going to weld in the hex nut on the inside of the pan for my drain plug. And the reason being is I'm going to try to use this governor as is. I'm going to change out the gearing. I'm going to put the governor in there. We're going to drive the car, and we're going to see how quickly it shifts. And if it shifts too quickly, I'm going to drain the pan again. I'm going to take the governor out, and I'm going to lighten up these weights. Probably lighten up the heavy one. Usually I do both. I believe, and don't quote me on this, I think the heavy weight is for part throttle shifting and the light weight is for wide open throttle shifting, shift points. So you got to be careful. There's a YouTube video that shows somebody who actually took apart a Grand National governor and weighed each piece. And you could tell that there's a lot of material missing from a Grand National one. And he weighed them on a gram scale. Usually I'll use that as a reference, and I don't match it. I try to go a little bit to the heavy side of that weight because I'd rather have it shift early rather than too late, especially since the 301 doesn't like to rev too much. So I'm going to throw this in there as is, after changing the speedometer gear. That's what the drain plug is for. If we have to go back in and lighten the weights, then we'll do that to change the shift points. But really, I don't have the 342 gear in the car just yet. I don't want to modify this until after I get the 342 gear in the rear end, then see how it shifts, because having a different rear gear ratio could affect the shift points. But we'll get to that, later and figure that out. So in the meantime, right now, get a drain plug in. We're going to do the speedometer gears, get it back together, throw fluid in it, and see if this thing actually shifts through the gears and works the way it should.
All right, pan's back on. You got the drain plug in. We've got the governor all switched out. This is the bracket from ShiftWorks that goes to the pan to hook up the stock cable if you're using the stock shifter. If you do decide to use the B&M Quicksilver shifter, you can't use the stock cable. You're going to end up using the B&M cable, and then you're also going to end up using the B&M shift linkage and putting the, actually kind of making a hybrid with this bracket to control the steering column linkage. But we have that bracket on. We don't have the steering column linkage hooked up yet. It's actually missing a component that we got to get. But I already started it up, checked the fluid, topped it off. It goes through the gears. All the gears work. All we got to do then is wire up to our pressure switch for the torque converter clutch, make sure that that works. Car's currently got 308 gears in it, and I'm kind of tempted to just go take it for a ride with 308s in it, but the weather's not cooperating right now. So we're going to end the video there. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you got any questions about it, you can always reach out to us through email or give us a call, and be sure to check out the website, TTAperformance.com, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.